Hey, Armand here with your belated September 2019 astrology forecast. Belated because I was elated to be at the Baltimore NCGR conference over the beginning of the month. But perhaps I really just didn't want to I didn't want to do the forecast because it's a difficult one. There's nothing we can say about September, I don't think, that is easily put into words. We have a couple of things going on that are really uncanny. We have a lot of moon void times. They're very long. We have the same number as usual, but they're very long, especially in the first half of the month. We have extremely long moon void times. You'd have to follow on Facebook or perhaps get your weekly newsletter at armanddiaz.com in order to know specifically when they are. But the upshot is there's a lot of moon void times. And that means that things don't turn out as planned, that there is a bit of a sense of loss of control, perhaps. We also have a lot of Earth energy in the sky. We have a lot of Virgo, Capricorn, Taurus. We have Jupiter holding it down in the fire sign of Sagittarius, and Neptune over in Pisces, which is a water sign. There are really no planets in air for the first half of the month, except when the moon goes through the signs of Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius. But other than that, we don't have much air in the sky at all. And that's going to shift around mid-month. In fact, if we were going to say something about this month, we would say that the first half of the month is dominated by Earth, and the second half, perhaps, by air. So even still, okay, let's say we're going to start out the month with, we start the month just coming off of the new moon in Virgo. We have a lot of planets in the sign. And so the first week of the month, we would think that it's very good for that sort of earthy practicality. You know the story with September, this Virgo time anyway, is always kind of the time of getting back to routine. You know, it's a back to school time. It is, you know, the holidays are over, so people are getting back to their regular sort of work routine. You can't spell routine without R-U-T. So, you know, the basic sense of it is that this is a sort of time to settle back into things. I don't know that we ever really feel that we're settled back into things anymore. And certainly with Saturn and Pluto approaching their conjunction, we're feeling more, I think, unease and uncertainty than anything like, okay, well, now things are back to normal. But I think that we're trying to do that as the month begins. The other thing is that while we have a lot of earthy energy and we have a lot of moon void times, both of which suggest kind of, you know, practical, step-by-step, go along, deal with things on an everyday kind of level, we have aspects that are giving us a very different message. We have aspects to Jupiter from Venus, from Mercury, and from the Sun and Mars in the first half of the month. And we have aspects to those same planets to Neptune. And so there's this kind of what I would call a sort of carnival atmosphere with Jupiter and Neptune so active. But you know, they're active from behind the scenes. You know, we're mixing fire with earth, and we're mixing earth with water. You know, so we either get a good solid, you know, earthen vessel, or we get mud, hot mud. My sense of it being kind of a carnival is that it's something that is very experiential and yet very, very hard to pin down, very, let's just call it ephemeral. The energy in the first half of the month is one where you know, what I would say about this is it may be the sort of thing where you need to do rather than to think. That might be the way to look at it. It's the kind of thing where you have to actually, you know, move the couch to the other side of the room to see if it's better there. You can't quite do it through imagination. You can't quite do it through, you know, working with a diagram or something like that. And that's a metaphor for everything that goes on this month. You actually have to do things in order to get a perspective on them. It's a strange way to go about things. And, you know, of course, we're talking about things that are less physical, then it becomes a bit of a challenge to figure out how you're going to do things. And yet without the air, we can't really just take perspective on things all that easily. And without the fire, we're not we're not quite sure where the inspiration is. Or we get little bursts of air, little bursts of fire, but not enough to actually, do it all in your head. Not enough to do it all in the imagination. You actually have to physically figure things out. You need to do, and that's, I think, one of the big themes of the first half of the month is doing things. Now, after the full moon on the 14th, things change because we have Mercury and Venus going into Libra on the very same day, and then we have the sun coming in on the 23rd. So the second half of the month, we're going to get much more air, and that works better with the fire for certain, and it will help us to work with the energies that continue to be in Earth. Mars will still be in Earth signs and so on. And Uranus and Saturn and Pluto aren't going anywhere. So it helps us to work with the Earth energy. When we have a little bit more air, we can sort of, get a little bit of distance on things. So that's the first half of the month contrasted with the second half of the month. First week of the month, very active time. We have a lot of stuff going on in the first week, but the sense of having control, because we have very long moon void times, is poor. And Mercury gets into an aspect with both Jupiter and Neptune at the end of the first week of the month. Very, very likely to get us to be a little bit too much. You're going to be seeing a lot of people going to be a little extra towards the end of the first week of the month. There's a great chance that political polemics will be especially polarized with this aspect, with these aspects. And I think that it'll probably be sometime around the beginning of the second week of the month, with the moon in Capricorn and then Aquarius, that we can sort of unpack what happened. So right around this, Thursday, Friday into Saturday of the 5th, 6th, and 7th of the month, you want to have a little bit of caution about things. Things may sound very good, but they may not be. We could also see people grabbing a hold of the fact and then just sort of, drilling a hole in your head with one little bit of information. You just got to keep hitting on that, hitting on it. You could see one little bit of information and blow it out of proportion. You may think that, the forest is the tree. So it can be very difficult to get perspective on things during this time. And yet people would be quite inspired and perhaps inspiring, you see, during this period. So there's a lot of stuff that just sort of suggests caution. It's a great time if you have an announcement to make. If you're trying to connect with people, it's a good time to do it. It's probably a good time to release this video. But if you're not sure about things, it is not much of a decision time the first week of the month. Now, the second week of the month, we get a little bit more grounded as Mercury and Mars come into a trine with with Pluto and Saturn. There's some help that comes, especially the early part of the second week of the month, and yet the sun goes on to oppose Neptune. It's just not a very clear energy. The sun actually, it squares Jupiter and then goes on to oppose Neptune. So, here egos can get a little bit out of hand. It's what I would call a great soul energy, but, on a more earthy level, a little bit dicey. So egos could get out of hand. Still, if you have a task to do, that's probably the time to be doing it. And then we get to the full moon. The full moon on the 14th is trine Pluto, and at the same time, Mars is opposing Neptune. The full moon is in Pisces to begin with, a very active time, a very reactive time. Once again, if there is something that is really key for you, it's a pretty good time. If you know what it is that has to be done, it's a good time. If you're just kind of getting swept up in the energies, though, it could really be kind of a tidal wave where you feel out of control, and you might be inclined to act on that out of control feeling. Once again, with Mercury and Venus at the very last degree of Virgo, what's going to happen at the full moon. All of the information that you're taking in about relationships, about values, about finances, about anything, all the information that you're taking in, you're looking at it with a fine-tooth comb, and yet it's being expanded. It's like you're looking at everything through a magnifying glass. And the problem with that is you see the details well enough, but you don't get the big picture. So that's the first half of the month. Second half of the month, we get the air energy. We get to step back a little bit with the addition of that Libra air energy. And then things come to a screeching halt. All this activity, all this out of control activity comes to a screeching halt as Saturn stations to go direct on the 18th. Now, the time around Saturn stations is worth paying attention to. Very typically, there's a heavy responsibility around this time. So that craziness that was around the full moon on the 14th and, the day before and the day after, the days before and after, is sort of contained by the Saturn station on the 18th. By the time we get to the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, things are going a little bit slower and we have more responsibilities to deal with. We may feel like the weight is on our shoulders and it could be a little bit tough to deal with that. Mars-Pluto trine at that time is very, very helpful for directing your energies, though. So yeah, there's responsibilities on you. It's not a real playtime for sure. And yet we can use this time quite productively. And Saturn always wants you to work. He's going to put delays in there. He's going to make it tough. All of that's going to happen. But the flip side of it is, if you do the work, you're going to get some reward at some point in time. It's not a gift, but you will. Saturn is fair. You will get what you'll get what you deserve, so to speak. Around this time too, we're going to have the square between Jupiter and Neptune. That is on the 21st. Now, this is most likely to play out in the collective, and usually Jupiter and Neptune, when they aspect each other, it's about larger social programs. It tends to favor progressive political causes. It would probably be, whether you're looking in the US or Britain or in Europe, you're probably looking at the more progressive side of things, the usually described by the liberal parties, or the parties that are perceived to be liberal, getting a bit of a boost around this time, but also a little bit of stress and strain, and also again, that polarizing force that is likely to be very, very strong at that time. So it favors progressive political and social causes, but not without a certain amount of stress, and probably with a certain amount of internal strife within those parties or within those perspectives. As we get along towards the end of the month, things get kind of intense. We have Mercury square Pluto, Venus square Saturn at the new moon coming into the 26th, 27th, and the new moon itself on the 28th. And so it seems a little bit like a kind of deadline decision time again. It's with the energy winding down late in the lunar cycle, my sense is that it will be a time when we're going to be feeling more or less like we need to make decisions, and it's really where are we going to invest and where are we going to reinvest. Sometime around the 21st through the end of the month is good to take a little time to sit back and see what's working for you. Now, one other thing, separate topic sort of this month, is that Venus is very active. Venus, the planet of love and relationship, but also let's not forget, Venus has a lot to do with things like finances, valuables, and your values. First half of the month, very active. We have Venus. The month actually started with Venus trine Saturn, but she goes on in the first week to square Jupiter and then oppose Neptune and then trine Pluto by the end of the first week. That's really something that's the first week of the month, by Friday night, you've got all of this activity happening. It feels like there's a lot of potential in relationship. There's an even mix between opportunity and the chance to build on things at the first half of the month. By the 13th, on the 13th, Mercury comes by and conjoins Venus, a good time to talk about things, to share your opinions and so on. And then Venus on the 14th at the full moon goes into Libra, opposes Chiron, and then goes on to square Saturn on the 25th. So, and then sextiles Jupiter on the 28th, and in early October, on the 30th of September, Venus will square Pluto. What I'm getting out of this is that the beginning of the month holds a lot of relationship potential, and the end of the month has a feeling of relationship decisions. So, you start out with potential, whether it's a new relationship or whether you're moving along in the relationship that you have. And then by the end of the month, it comes time to start making some decisions. That's also true of finances, where you'll see sort of, there'll be potentials for financial things. You may start feeling like you'd like to have some valuable type of thing. You may be looking to buy a luxury item or something like that at the beginning of the month. And yet it's probably at the end of the month that you have to actually make the decision. It's a kind of caveat emptor thing. I would say that what looks really good, if you're going to, look to make a major purchase or something like that, what looks really good at the beginning of the month could, the price tag could involve some sticker shock towards the end of the month. So be careful with that. Although I would not, by any stretch of the imagination, say that you shouldn't go ahead with things. I would just say you should be careful about things. Actually, Venus and Saturn, or Venus even with Pluto in Capricorn, there is a certain amount of resonance. Venus is in her own sign, Saturn's in his own sign. There is a kind of, it costs what it costs type of thing. And in relationship too, there's this sort of what we want, what we feel is going to work is, it can be brokered and negotiated. There's a sense of negotiation about things. Actually, the whole second half of the month for everything has a little bit of that negotiating, diplomacy kind of approach is liable to be the way to go with most things. You want to be diplomatic. You want to approach things in a, in a positive way, but also keeping in mind what you want. All right, there is your long and belated forecast for September. I'll see you soon.